Call the meeting to order. This is a meeting of the Autism Advisory Council. I'm Emmett Hanger, Senator from Augusta County, and I've chaired the Advisory Council on Autism for several years now. In fact, sponsored legislation a number of years ago to create this, and I think we've had some very productive sessions over the years. We have not met. Obviously, there's been a lot of inaction in a lot of our commissions and councils over the last couple of years with COVID. And we've got some returning veterans, a couple of returning veterans here, and we've also got some new faces. So I'd like to begin by just basically having everyone identify themselves. And Glenn, will we get you here?
Sure. Delegate Glenn Davis. I represent the 84th District in the middle of Virginia Beach.
Okay, Ken.
Delegate Ken Plum, I represent the 36th District, that's in Fairfax County, the Reston area.
Good afternoon, everyone. Delegate Joshua Cole, and I represent the 28th House District. That's the city of Fredericksburg in Stafford County.
Very good.
Hello, this is Delegate Kay Corey. I am calling from the wonderful west coast of the Oregon Shore, and happy to hear your voices, although I'm not sure that you all sound any better than the ocean over here. Too bad I can't go out and let you listen. And Senator Hanger, thank you so much for having the meeting now so we can actually get some work done before next year.
Yes, well, it's good to have you join us. And I didn't realize you were going to be way out there on the opposite coast. So thank you for you're coming through loud and clear.
It probably changes I'm sure it changes completely the way I think, right?
Well, you're being on the left coast, you mean?
Yeah, I'm afraid that's probably what I
Well, you are
meant.
from Northern Virginia, so I don't expect there's a whole lot of difference, Kay.
Ouch, ouch, ouch.
Some of us are further left than others.
Okay. Thank you for joining us, Kay. Obviously, this is a serious council here with a mission, but thank you for making time during your travels to be with us here today. Yes, and now you.
Good afternoon. I'm Bill Shadley. I represent myself, I guess, parent representative, the citizen representative here. This is my second term on the Autism Advisory Council.
Yes, and Dale Schott is one of our returning veterans, as well as Delegate Plum and myself. And we do have a couple other members unable to join us today. So we will probably a fairly short meeting today as we try to...
Excuse me. I'm sorry. I am attending virtually. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to introduce myself because I'm a newcomer. I'm Dr. Polly Panitz. I'm a behavioral developmental pediatrician, and I have a practice in Northern Virginia where I primarily see young children with autism.
Well, Dr. Panitz, we're so pleased that you could join us here. I was unaware that you were on the lines. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. And
I'm pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
And we welcome your expertise on this subject. Let's have staff identify themselves as well. We've got 3 members of staff that support us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julia Carlton with DLS.
I'm Trevor Marion with DLS.
Good afternoon. Lindley Griffin, Senate Clerk's Office.
Very good. Thank you all. As I indicated, I've had the opportunity to chair this council for several years, and it's perhaps time that we hand the reins over to someone else. So our first order of business is the election of a new chair. Delegate Plum?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your service for many years on this important committee, but it's now my pleasure to put in nomination the name of Delegate Josh Cole to be the chair.
Okay. Is there a second?
I would like to second that.
Okay, we've had a couple of seconds now. Thank you all very much. Are there other nominations? Hearing none, I'll close the nominations, and now we'll vote. All those in favor of Delegate Cole signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Well, it's unanimous, Delegate Cole. And I will have to say that Delegate Cole and I teamed up with a musical venture not too long ago, and he can be chair now, but, you know, we might get famous, so If we do, probably both of us you'll have to fill our vacancies. Dr. Cole, why don't we just switch places so you can be at the center of the table?
Thank you, sir.
Congratulations.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Sure. Okay. Whew. We're back on. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm excited. Thank you first to Senator Hanger. And we're excited to get started today with our business. So I guess we'll just continue on with the business. Thank you. The next order of business is the public comment section to solicit input on items to include in the 2021 work plan. And I believe we do have some attendees virtually. So I'll turn it over to staff.
If you'd like to speak, if you could raise your hand. Teresa Champion, you're online.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Chairman Cole, and thank you to Senator Hanger for all his service in the past. I also want to thank all the members of the committee for taking the time to attend and to try to do something on these issues that continue to plague us. In particular, I'd like to thank Dilshad because she's been a real hero in the autism community for these issues. So I'd like to start with raising several issues that I think need to be included, and I don't know at some point how you all tease these out. One, autistic adults not being diverted in the judicial system. This has become a real problem because we do have diversion courts. We did pass some recent legislation for considering ID, DD in these criminal justice matters. And it is troubling to know that up here in Northern Virginia, there is a young man with a diagnosis of autism who's been in jail almost a year and hasn't had his trial yet, the case hasn't been diverted, he hasn't received treatment. I mean, it's still happening. And recently there was a young man in Virginia Beach who I worked on the case who has ID, DD, autism, and is Black, just turned 18, and he was having a med management issue, and someone at the hospital charged him with assault. And it was either a security guard or a police officer, we're still not sure who. He spent multiple days in jail. And this was nothing to do with him. It was a med management issue. So he was, well, there's more on that topic. I'll include it later. Lack of caregivers for in-home support services under the waiver. I know the legislature took some action on this with reference to pay raises for caregivers, but we really do not have an influx of personnel for these services. So we have to somehow figure out a way to bring people into the system and train them and give some sort of meaningful compensation. These people would rather take jobs that pay more with benefits, and I can understand why. I'd like to know what the Department of Education is doing to support the extra year that the legislature allotted funding for the students who aged out of education last year during the COVID period. And the legislature very kindly allotted funding for these individuals to continue another year. Superintendent Lane issued a memorandum that said these students were not going to be given IDEA or IEP supports in school. And when the legislature was back in their special session, they did add some more language clarifying that they fully intended the Department of Education to provide those supports. However, families don't know about this. School has started and families are unaware that the Department of Education did nothing to get the information in the hands of families. Advocate groups tried to do that, but it wasn't that successful. And families are not taking advantage of this when they're entitled to. So what is the DOE going to do to support and get this information to students? So there's the crucial issue I do want to bring up is the lack, and the Dr. Panitz, you'll be interested in this, the lack of medical care for adults with a diagnosis of autism. Autistic adults have, autistics in general, we're discovering have multiple comorbidities that have gone unrecognized in the past, such as GI issues, genetic issues, neuropsychiatric issues, other things that everyone is always associated with behavior, but is not. The Eastern Virginia Medical School has an autism program, but they only service behavioral issues, which makes no sense to me. And, I have an adult who's homebound. Getting medical care is impossible. And we're very grateful that we've been able to get the remote services, the telehealth services in place that we begged for years. And this is going to sound a little sour grapes, but now that everybody else needs them, all of a sudden those accommodations are being given to people who always needed those accommodations. So I'm very grateful for that, but we don't have doctors who are trained. Again, I go back to trained in adult issues. I go back to one of the first cases I mentioned of the young man in Virginia Beach. And the reason I want to highlight this case under this topic is because he was sent to Eastern State Hospital, and Eastern State Hospital flipped him back immediately to jail, saying that they do not serve autism. They don't do autism, quote unquote. So this is a huge issue. How is a young adult who is having a medical crisis supposed to get medical care if none of these state hospitals serve these individuals? Housing, job training, supported residential. We need flexibility in these programs. Often lead the qualifications and the regulations and the oversight is just beyond belief. And families are already treated like criminals, basically, for needing services and support. There's constantly, like the electronic visit verification system we had to go through, where we were gratefully able to get that exemption for in-home caregivers. I'm very grateful for that. Thank you so much to the legislators for recognizing that issue. Delegate Tran was a big help on that. But we are constantly bombarded with all these regulations and all these requirements, and there needs to be more flexibility in them. We need a central location for information sharing. All of these things, all of these issues I've mentioned have been addressed, especially the educational situation, there's been directions issued on how to handle this, but families, again, are not aware. So I don't know if this needs to be a public-private partnership, if it needs to, but some sort of central location where individuals who have young children can go and look at the information. Department of Human Services and Behavioral Health, DBDHS, just redid their webpage, and I'm sure they all think it's very attractive and very pretty. It is still not user friendly. And in fact, when you go to look for something, you are sent to go to a memorandum, and then that memorandum has a hot link, and then that hot link takes you to another memorandum. Information must be disseminated in very clear terms to families who are already overwhelmed and struggling to understand a system that is foreign to them. And the last point I'd like to make is that there's a new behavioral health commission that is just standing up. And I hope that maybe there's some coordination that we can have with that group. But again, autism is just not, behaviors are communication in autism, but there are other underlying medical conditions that are going unrecognized and untreated. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Champion.
Mr. Chairman,
Delegate Plum.
before we go forward, I think we have to pause for a minute and thank Ms. Champion for her testimony. You have been the true expert on this subject for many, many years, and we are dependent upon your observations and so on. Thank you for that. But I'd like to say that as we plan an agenda for our future meeting, if we could have somebody from the Department of Education come and talk with us. I'm particularly concerned about that extra year of funding that we made available. Well, we got to have some turnaround on that right quick. So if we could have somebody from the Department of Education report to us. Secondly, the notion about the website being more user-friendly, particularly for those persons with disabilities, is something we've heard a lot from over the years. And where do we stand? Maybe the department could bring us up to date on where they stand on getting that accomplished. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Jude Harrison, you can unmute.
Hi, thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I just found out about this meeting about 30 minutes ago, so I'm very glad to be here and grateful to see that you're holding this. I am Director of Communications for LRID, Legal Reform for the Intellectually and Developmentally Disabled. And my partner, Brian Kelmar, many of you might be familiar with seeing us advocating at General Assemblies for several years now. And we've had good success, thanks to all of you, and with getting some bills passed that will help to make a positive difference for people, mostly on the autism spectrum, but also for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I would just love to hear what you all are planning for criminal justice reform. And I'm going to leave it at that and keep my comments short, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Harrison.
April Birch.
Hi there. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? I apologize. I'm in my car.
We can hear you.
Oh, wonderful. My name's April Birch. I am the executive director of Cooking Autism, which is a Rappahannock area community nonprofit that deals mainly with autism, but with other children and young adults with neurological disabilities. The reason why I'm here today, I'm also on a council in the Rappahannock area called the Rappahannock Area Autism Council. And I am also an educator in Stafford County. I just would like to see if we could add to something that's pretty important, add to your agenda to really talk and really find out how we can really help our first responders, law enforcement, our transportation division become more trained in how to respond to, let's say, sensory overload and what that looks like, and to be able to really have a uniform training across the state of Virginia, because I know that some counties do have it and some don't, to be able to identify when an adult or a child is having a problem, especially when it comes to our developmentally delayed or autistic community members. The danger here is that sometimes a sensory overload can lead to flapping or clapping or loud noises, and that in general can sometimes it can look troubling, it can look scary. So my heart here is to kind of ask for help to be able to have the state of Virginia be able to really have a training, to have a uniform training to where our autistic community members have a safer, will have a safer interaction with transportation, first responders, law enforcement. Now, that's not to say that adults with autism can't get themselves into trouble, but what my heart here is to see that there's a training that can help diffuse, if you will, and help to identify when a person is having an overload, just to keep that person out of trouble, and also to keep our law enforcement, our first responders out of trouble as well. So it's kind of a win-win situation across the board. So that's why I'm here today. It's just to kind of ask for help and maybe get the ball rolling on having a more well-informed training that can really hone in on identifying issues like that.
Thank you so much, Ms. Birch.
If any of the 5 participants remaining want to speak, if you could raise your hand.
My hand is raised. I don't know if you could see it. May I speak?
The chair recognizes.
Yes, thank you. Again, I'm Dr. Polly Panitz. I am a pediatrician, and I love the agenda items that have been raised, but I have a very different perspective since I work with very young children. And excuse me, if you will, I've never attended such a meeting. I'm used to medical settings. But just to give you a very brief background, which might be redundant, autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder. It's very common, maybe 1 in 60, and it can be diagnosed as early as 18 months, although the average in this country is age 4. And it is a diagnosis that for the most part, 90% of individuals will retain for a lifetime. Autism, you've met one child, one adult with autism, you've met one individual with autism. There's no linear course. There's no roadmap for parents. It's a very overwhelming diagnosis for parents to receive and requires a great deal of input. I think what has surprised me in my 28 years in Northern Virginia is we have a great wealth of clinicians, but a paucity of available services for our children. And I came up with a list of priorities that I would like to share, and I'll try to be brief. Some may be relevant, some may not. In Northern Virginia, and I would imagine the rest of Virginia, it's even more pronounced. We have a lack of diagnostic services. It's not unusual for a child to wait 12 to 18 months to get a diagnosis. And without diagnosis, they can't receive insurance reimbursement for autism-specific services. I presume you all have talked over and over about the long wait list for the DD waiver, but I just wanted to mention that because my autism-specific practice is 13 years old. I have children in my practice who are still on the DD waiver wait list. Early intervention services, although available, are grossly inadequate for young children under IDEA. Our children meet criteria and they get wonderful family support, but they don't receive any autism-specific services until they enter classroom-based services. And that's either age 2 or age 3 in Virginia. And there is a loss of this wonderful opportunity for long-term impact. We know that early intervention makes a huge difference. We know that one of the major positive prognostic indicators, what's associated with a long-term good outcome, is communication, a child's ability to communicate successfully before they enter elementary school, so before age 5 or 6. And there's our opportunity. And yet our early intervention services are very much family focused and not utilizing evidence-based interventions for autism. That to me is problematic. And they're extremely variable. So most children at most will receive an hour a week, whereas the literature recommends 25 hours a week of services. Our special education services, once they get into school, the teachers have variable training, the IEPs, the document that's used to structure the services and monitor a child's progress to service is extremely variable in quality, in depth, and breadth. There's a tendency to focus on early academics. I've had kids with autism that are meeting academic landmarks and their IEPs are being removed, even though they clearly have other issues that, in my mind, are having a great impact, but school does not feel they are. We need to focus on issues like skills of independence and social skills, and not just on academics. And our children that are most successful and go into a gen ed setting have even less access to autism specific services, to those behavioral specialists and autism trained teachers who can support their progress moving forward. And that's really our emphasis, is trying to get our children with autism into general education classrooms. There's a huge inequity of private services between families, between those that have and those that don't, especially for our working class families that haven't gotten the DD waiver. Many of them can't access ABA services, and that is all that is available in our state. The law states that insurance is mandated to support ABA, whereas we now have literature to support many of the developmental services, but they are not reimbursed by insurance, and they really aren't available in our state. They are available in other parts of the country. The services that are covered, as I said, they vary greatly in terms of quality, in terms of quantity, in terms of continuity. There's a huge problem with continuity. And the ABA services that we have, because it's such a weak business model, they have a very hard time retaining their service providers. They're called RBTs. Many of them want to go back to school or get a job that has better income and better benefits. So attrition is a huge issue, and many of our ABA service providers have now gone to a center-based model because it's a better business model, but the families are left out. So rather than the services being provided in the home, the young child is now placed in a center-based type of intervention. And there are pluses and minuses to that, but I feel that families should have a choice. And then the last two things I just wanted to mention is that many families with autism, with a child with autism, don't seek pediatric care as much as other children, as they would for other children. And this is documented in the literature on a national level. And this is probably because pediatricians aren't trained to provide care for children with autism. And as someone mentioned earlier, autism is associated with many medical comorbidities and psychiatric comorbidities. So children with autism are much more likely to have constipation, to have gastrointestinal issues, seizures, obesity, sleep deficits, poor nutrition, and lack of exercise. So long-term, many medical comorbidities and the psychiatric comorbidities are really overwhelming, maybe as many as 50%. Some centers report 80% comorbid or coexisting attention deficit disorder. Depression is very common, anxiety is very common, and these can lead to challenging behaviors, whether it's irritability, aggression, and so on and so forth. So I feel that pediatricians need more support and more training. And on a state level, I'm very disappointed that autism teaching has been left out of VMAP, which is a state-sponsored mental health access training for pediatricians. And lastly, care for our families. There are many wonderful supports out there for families. They all need it. They all need case management and support making these decisions as they devise, write, and monitor their own care plan and roadmap. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Panitz. I didn't know you were a member of the commission when you first came in, but I'm looking forward to working with you and all the expertise you will bring and that Ms. Ali will bring as well.
Thank you.
Are there any others still waiting to speak?
Jessica Phillips, if you could unmute.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm Jessica Phillips. I'm the CEO at CA Human Services. Many of you all know us by our former name. We've been around for about 25 years, Commonwealth Autism. And so what I'd like to do is share a couple of resources that may be helpful based on some of the prior comments. The first one, April, I think you mentioned the piece about training for law enforcement. For many, many years, CA, in partnership with the Department of Criminal Justice Service, we used to convene a public safety work group. And this was out of the recommendations that came from the JLARC 2008-2009 autism report. And so for many, many years, we were pulling together law enforcement officers, magistrates, judges, and providing some of that overview training. There was good response to that and participation, but participation varied, and it really depended on the locality in terms of whether the leadership felt like it was important for, their law enforcement officers to receive this training. My understanding is several years ago that the Department of Criminal Justice Service, in partnership with some other entities in the state, contracted out to Niagara University this content to make it available online for law enforcement officers. So that might be something to look into. I'm unsure of what the status of that is, but my point is not to reinvent the wheel, because there's already a lot of material that's been developed. I'll share one of the barriers, and this is from my professional experience, but also my personal experience. I come from a law enforcement family, several law enforcement officers in Virginia, and they get opportunities to receive this training, but because it is not mandated for them to receive the training, they don't always go to the training. So that is, I understand there's a lot of mandates and requirements for teachers and for law enforcement officers, but that's just some feedback for this group in terms of one of the barriers. There doesn't seem to really be as much of the motivation unless you have a personal connection, like a child with autism, in terms of participating in that type of training. So they're relatively low attended by law enforcement officers, unless there's a personal connection. The second point that I'd like to make has to do with the issues we hear every day, as I'm sure you all do, from families or people who are impacted by autism and DD, about their struggle with trying to understand what they need, where to go to get it, like how to access that information. And then once you figure out how to access it, it's the struggle with trying to find a qualified provider. So, there are multiple issues here, but the first one is, many of us have been working, long and hard over the years to try to make it easier for families to find what they need. I don't know how many databases there are at nonprofits, around the state of Virginia, but it's a disjointed system. And there needs to be, there's got to be a better solution to this. I'm not sure what it is, but people have been working tirelessly to try to solve for this. And it's still to this day is extremely difficult for all of the reasons already mentioned here for families to find, what it is that they need. I'm curious as a provider about the role that Unite Us or Unite VA will play. And I know that is this is a new initiative, but that might be something that this committee considers looking into, since it seems like there will be some responsibility with Unite VA to help connect people to resources via a technology platform. So I'm optimistic about that, but I also know that that's probably not going to solve for all of the issues around this. And so one of the things that our organization is looking into is, could autism case management be part of the solution? Someone on the call today mentioned the fact that ABA is the only thing that's covered by insurance. There are states, and we pulled together some research about autism case management in other states where this is covered. And so could that be a solution? I don't know, but it's something that we're looking at, and we presented some of our findings to an initial group of stakeholders, and we would be happy to share that information that we found with you all so that perhaps we think together about whether it's useful or not. The third point that I'd like to make is around the waitlist issues, and this is one of the major priorities that our organization continues to work towards in terms of training providers to use the ADOS, which is one of the gold standard tools for diagnosing autism. Because of COVID, we were forced to obviously pivot online and start to provide this training using technology. And so we're doing more of that, and we can make that information available to you all, and people can push that information out to your networks so that providers who are interested can attend that training. We need more providers who are able to do this. We hear from families who contact providers, and their wait lists are 6 months to sometimes a year. And that shouldn't be. So that's an area that we're trying, to do our piece, but more work is definitely needed in that regard. The last piece that I'm going to mention is dovetails with the provider shortage comment. And I'll speak specifically as a board certified behavior analyst and some of the comments that have been made about registered behavior technicians. The bottom line is there are not enough of these providers in the state. And national data indicate that most providers are probably 80%, I think, of behavior analysts are white women. And so we're not solving for the diversity of the provider network that's needed to serve the diverse population that we have in Virginia. So that is another area in terms of, what types of partnerships with colleges and universities here in Virginia might be formed in order to offer that training curriculum so that we can start to graduate more providers, because the demand exceeds, the supply. So I appreciate the opportunity to share those points. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips.
I believe that's all, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you so much. The next order of business leads us into the member discussion regarding the items included in the 2021 work plan. And so I will open the floor if anyone has any comments to raise.
Mr. Chair, this is Delegate Corey. I would like to comment on that too. I unfortunately can't see who else has their hand up, so perhaps you are developing a list of members who want to speak, and I would like to be on that list.
All right, well, I'll recognize Delegate Davis, and then we'll come immediately to you, Delegate Corey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
I just wanted to make the comment. I know this last year or so with our schools has been very difficult, and no much more so than those with disabilities and those specifically on the spectrum. I know for a while we all thought we were on the backside of this. Our kids are now going back into school in person. We've been hearing kind of about this potential resurgence now in a different variation of COVID. And the concern is we may, if we find ourselves going back into a remote situation of kids, is there some type of conversation or plans in place being talked about how we can better serve this community if we should find ourselves there again? Obviously, I think there was a lot of disservice to them. I know no one could have anticipated what transpired, but I was wondering if there is something in place as we potentially face this again with this community.
Thank you, Delegate Davis. I think that is something that we should discuss. I'll open the floor to Delegate Corey. The chair recognizes Delegate Corey.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Delegate Davis. And earlier in this meeting, it was mentioned that we should hear from the Department of Education about the extra year. I think that that should be one of the items on top of our agenda that we accomplish as quickly as possible, hearing from the Department of Education. There are just a couple other things I wanted to mention. And as first, I would like to be sure that you know, Mr. Chairman, that as chair of the Disability Commission, it is my hope that we will work together often, since we do have an overlapping mission. It would make a lot of sense to combine our resources. In the past couple of years, I've been working with Northern Virginia ARC to develop, and we haven't finished, we haven't gotten there yet, a training program for judges so that judges would be aware and capable of supporting plaintiffs who are on the spectrum. There are many unfortunate stories of what happens to adults who are in the criminal justice system and whose needs are not recognized by the bench when their cases are brought to trial. And I would like to see this council, if nothing else, simply recommend that we need to have a plan for dealing with this and training those members of the court system how to deal with and support people who are on the spectrum who come before them. And then my final comment is several people prior to this meeting mentioned to me that more and more there are newly diagnosed adults who are, as I said, newly diagnosed on the spectrum. And it's a slightly different need for information about how to proceed supporting yourself, getting services that are appropriate. And one thing that two different people mentioned to me who've just been diagnosed is that they would really appreciate some sort of support group that they could join and share their concerns and what they've learned by being newly diagnosed. So those are the issues that I wanted to bring before this council, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Corey. I'm new to all of this, and so I'm hoping we can ask the clerks to see if our next scheduled meeting, if we can have the Department of Education to come before us so that we can hear a report from them on those two issues that were raised about the plans for if there's another shutdown, and just hearing from them in general.
Sure, Mr. Chair, we will definitely reach out to the Department of Education to get a speaker to come and address those issues.
Thank you. Delegate Plum?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's commend all those people who spoke. Unfortunately, it's the case that what they had to offer as testimony is things that we have heard before, continue to be on our agenda, and some we don't quite get to, but continue to be of importance. So I would hope that maybe it would be possible, and I don't always like to dump everything over on the staff, but if we took together the several comments that we've had, a lot of that overlaps and so on. If we couldn't have a kind of an outline of what that testimony has been, and I suspect that the outline of that testimony would really become a 2021 work plan, so to speak, if we could kind of knock those items off one by one.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for recognizing me. So I've been taking a lot of notes as we've been doing this, and all the comments being made, there's like 3 or 4 things that are overlapping that really have stood out to me. I'd like to thank Dr. Polly Panitz for her comments today because she has brought such a wealth of information to this from her knowledge base as a pediatrician and working with the younger population. Ms. Champion and I both have adults on the spectrum now. So whereas my focus was younger population, now obviously I'm thinking about the older population and adults with autism. And to the point about getting the Department of Education involved, which is what we need to do to figure out what's happening with the year that's being allotted to those who were supposed to graduate in 2021, I would ask us to also consider, with the Delta variant, with the unknown of could this happen again, could schools shut down again, what about those who are graduating in 2022? Which would be my son. So I do have a personal stake in it, I should say that. But it should be part of the discussion because it could just not affect the graduating class of people on the spectrum in 2021, but it could also happen in 2022 as well. And would we be extending those services, which I would hope we would do since my kid already lost a year and a half to this. That also being said, I do wanted to reiterate and agree with the testimony and emphasize the lack of caregivers, specifically in this I don't know if you want to call it post-COVID or continuing COVID landscape that we're in, but the ability to find caregivers to help with autistic individuals is just in the toilet. You cannot find anybody right now. It's a problem of hourly rates. It's a problem of it's easier to receive unemployment than do the work. It's a issue of it's just not tenable to do this work, but the need is still out there. I mean, it's greater than ever, and we're all struggling to find people to help us. And if you're lucky to even get a waiver, an FIS waiver or a CCC Plus waiver or something that is supposed to help you facilitate a plan for your loved one to stay at home with you, you can't even find the caregivers to do that, which means you're going to want to seek a CL waiver. Nobody wants, if you don't want your child to move out, how are you going to help stay together when you can't even find caregivers? So I have some out-of-the-box thoughts about different things we can do to incentivize and bring in populations to get trained for that role. Perhaps we can add that to the agenda for the work plan.
Okay.
It's a little bit of out-of-the-box thinking that I've been thinking about that I would like to discuss, the next time we get together.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Ali.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hanger?
Thank you. Just as a kind of a follow-up on developing our work plan, prior to this meeting, since I had been a focal point previously in my office, I had a number of contacts with individuals who were, some with programs interested in sharing information, and something we may want to consider in our work plan is remote meetings, maybe visiting a couple of the programs that are out there that exist. And also, I would offer you, Mr. Chairman, and to staff and the other members if we can all coordinate with staff, and my office has some information I can share with you and with staff as we develop further the work plan, and hopefully we'll be able to put together, a couple meetings at least this fall, so we can develop somewhat of an agenda either for legislation or budgetary action.
Well, thank you, Senator Hanger. I think that is key. I'm definitely ready to travel, so if we need to go have some meetings and different things like that, I'm really interested in doing that and making sure that we can hear those concerns. And I'm definitely looking forward to working with you, Ms. Ali, and Dr. Panitz with all of the expertise that you all bring to the table. So I guess we'll, is there anyone else in maybe virtually who has anything that they would like to raise as well? Or, I'm sorry, we do have a physical audience. If anyone is here with us today that would like to say anything in person as well.
I also have had my hand raised. I guess you can't see it.
I can't.
Is this Dr. Panitz? Yeah, okay. Well, I'll just speak up then. I wanted to add, I love the idea of calling on the Department of Education and prioritizing some issues. What I would like to add to that is how are they determining best practice for remote services for our children with autism? Because what I saw during COVID or have been seeing is completely inappropriate and created a great deal of anxiety for most of the kids I care for and their families who are trying to work and make sure their child was sitting on a computer. And there, as Ms. Phillips offered, many professionals during COVID have devised many tools for those working with children with autism that are extremely effective. And I think the Department of Education needs to look at those and revise the services they're offering for our children with autism.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Panitz. Ms. Ali?
No, I just can't agree enough with Dr. Panitz. That's really all I want to say. To facilitate the virtual learning with the autistic student population, anecdotally, I can say was a nightmare. Present company included, having to do it. One other thing I failed to mention the last time I was speaking, if you don't mind, is I think one of the universal things that everyone has been talking about is the ongoing, always problem of getting information into the hands of families, those with autism, providers, the central directory that we've been talking about. And I remember the last several times we sat in these meetings that we've had wonderful presentations from organizations and provider services across the state of Virginia geographically and focusing on different segments of the population. And I would take home folders and folders of information and feel like I was so privileged to now understand and learn this. And so many people who I know around me, who I interact with day to day in our communities, don't have that information. And it seems like such a ridiculous problem to still have in 2021, that we can't get the information into the hands of the people who need it. And that there's all these wonderful services and directories of information and articles, and how do you transition when you're 18 to adult autism, and how do you find a provider, and how do you get off a waiting list, and how do you get a waiver? But still there's a disjointed lack of where to find this information. So that's always been a priority, and I think it should continue to be. But I don't know how to move from presentations of organizations saying this is what we do to how do we get that information to those who need it.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Ali. Yes, sir. Yeah, you have to come to the podium.
Good afternoon. Apologize for coming in late. I got a little lost. Just want to introduce myself. I'm Richard Kreiner. I'm here representing our state's vocational rehab program. And I just wanted to ask that y'all please consider our agency as well as you're addressing, looking for resources, solutions to the issues that come up. Certainly anything from teen to adult is in our wheelhouse and something we're very much invested in and want to contribute to y'all's work as it relates to those issues.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, I definitely think we have marching orders for the next couple of months while we are able to meet. I guess we'll figure out how many opportunities we have to come together, I guess before the end of December, to determine and again, I'm new, so I don't know if we actually have working groups or smaller subcommittees that need to get together or, okay. Well, I will get with you all, I guess with staff, to figure out what we can do over the next couple of months, because I do think we need to hurry up and get working before whatever happens in January to make sure that we have some suggestions to submit legislation to the General Assembly. Before I move on to other business, is there anyone else who had any last minute input they wanted to share, whether virtually, here in person, or on the dais? Any hand raised on Zoom? All right, well, we move on to other business. Is there any outstanding business or any other business that need to be introduced?
Mr. Chair, on the agenda was the election of a vice chair.
Yes, we didn't do that.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hanger.
Delegate Plum and I were talking ahead of time, unless you all have a different plan. We thought maybe we would wait until the next meeting to do that, when maybe we had a full complement then to see where there might be an interest in that.
Any disagreements?
If you have a different idea, we'll entertain the different idea.
Okay. Anyone have any disagreements with that? To postpone the election of the vice chair until the next meeting? Do we have to put that for aye vote? Okay, well, we will postpone the election of the vice chair until the next meeting. All right, any other business? All right, without hearing any, I guess I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved and properly second. The August 18th meeting of the Autism Advisory Commission is hereby adjourned.